because I know that what I am able to accomplish in office will depend on what you are able to build on the outside. This is your city, and I am so, so proud to be your mayor.
Well, that's Seattle's 58th mayor, Katie Wilson, sworn in just a few days ago to thunderous applause at City Hall with a message of inclusiveness and hope for the future of the city. And that honeymoon was over mere hours after she was sworn in, a new battle brewing over how police are directed to make drug arrests and the involvement of drug diversion policies. What's going on there? Well, we'll figure that out. Plus, we'll look at some new committee assignments for a new city council and some new concerns over the recently launched program offering walk-in crisis care throughout Western Washington. All this and more on Seattle News, Views, and Brews this week, your coffee break political podcast. Happy New Year! I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on the Seattle channel. The views expressed here are mine, and I'm with my friend and co-host David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. David, Happy New Year to you, too. You're the father of two kids. I might know the answer to this already. Did you make it to midnight on January 1st?
Yeah, no, definitely not. We made it. We did have a nice sort of 6 p.m. New Year's Eve celebration with my kids and some friends' kids. But I knew it was midnight when I woke up to the sound of fireworks, and that was as close as I got.
Yep. That's about, well, hey, you know what? It happens later on down the line, too.
Yeah.
We had to sack out early, too. Well, anyway, thank you, David, for joining me once again. And a huge thanks to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. A shout out to all the patrons who came by City Grind to connect with us for our last show of 2025, which was a patrons appreciation event. You got the printed Seattle News, Views, Brews cookies and so much more. Really do appreciate you. If you are able to in this new year, please support the podcast for as little as $5 a month. With that, you get access to Patrons First podcast, one of those coming your way very soon, and you can even get your very own Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal. Check it out. So, become a patron, head to Patreon online, and support Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Also, thank you for watching this podcast on Converge Media. The video version of the podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get 2026 up and rolling. Time for Right Here, Right Now. David, you wrote about the inauguration of Katie Wilson a few days ago as Seattle's 58th mayor with her colleague, Alexa Yoon Hendricks. You have seen other mayors get inaugurated over the past decade plus here. How did the Wilson inauguration compare? What did you think?
Well, I have to be transparent, which is that the part of the story I wrote before I went on vacation. And,
there you go.
And okay. Alex was the one who was actually at City Hall, so I wasn't there.
Got it.
But, I read about it and I watched the videos and everything after. What has stood out to me as part of the transition was that she was bringing on all these names that were pretty familiar to people who have been tracking City Hall, and a lot of kind of mainstream names. And, frankly, it looked more like a typical City Hall group of people than perhaps you were expecting with someone like Katie Wilson. Right. My impression from the inauguration is it was a very Katie Wilson inauguration. There was a lot of transit riders union representation, a lot of young people, and it looked a lot more kind of like the coalition that I'm used to seeing surrounding Katie Wilson, even then more so than her transition team. Yeah. So that was interesting. I thought the line that I think kind of got the most attention was that the city should allow not just for bread but for roses.
What did you draw from that?
Well, I mean, there are two levels to that, which is the literal message that she's sending, which is that I think we should try and create a city that doesn't just meet people's needs but allows people to flourish and enjoy beautiful things as well. But the kind of deeper level thing here is that that's a pretty common socialist phrase that is turned. The Democratic Socialists of America, their emblem is a little rose, which is referring to that exact line. And so that, I think, is interesting because national media has made a lot out of the fact that she has identified with being a socialist, but locally she has not played that up very much. And, she didn't get the endorsement from the Democratic Socialists of America here. And so it was there in the background, but it wasn't all that front and center. That was kind of the most front and center direct reference to kind of some socialist leaning trappings to the new mayoral administration. So I thought that was interesting, So I guess my takeaway is the whole thing kind of felt the most kind of pure Katie Wilson that I have seen, both on the campaign trail and since she's won election. And I think for, her biggest backers, that was a great thing to see, because I think a lot of the people who are in City Hall have known and been around Katie Wilson for a long time. The question is, how much of that Katie Wilson is Mayor Katie Wilson versus how much of it is, frankly, the Brian Surratt
Sure.
affiliation version of
Yeah.
Katie Wilson, which is much more kind of conciliatory towards some of the interests who did not support her campaign.
Right, her deputy mayor. And just to go down that path a little bit further, I thought it was interesting during her address when she talked about kind of a crisis of conscience, if you will, in taking this job. She admitted she's been a bit of a rabble rouser, campaigning on affordability and taxing the rich. She said she would keep on holding those values, but also would be the mayor of the waterfront, the World Cup, the Seattle Center, or other centers the city would build in the future, whatever that means. I saw this as an attempt to bridge a gap between roughly half of Seattle who was on her side in the election and half who were on former Mayor Harrell's side. This race was very close. I just want to reiterate the closest in modern history, 2,011 votes in the last count there, separating the two candidates. I'm just trying to figure out how she goes down that, walking that line, David, going forward in a pretty divided electorate, really.
For sure. And, say what you want about Katie Wilson, but she is politically astute. She, I think, understands and has talked about this pretty openly, understands that she is not likely to succeed by just leaning on the groups of people who supported her. I think more so in some ways than her work in Seattle City Hall, I would say her work in places like Burien and Tukwila,
Sure.
helping to pass minimum wage increases there.
Right.
I think through those experiences, she understands that legislative and political change likely happens when you have as big of a coalition as possible. She talks about herself as a coalition builder.
Right.
I think she understands that she needs as much buy-in from as many people as she can to do what she wants to do. And so you always hear kind of outreach to the voters, well, except for maybe if you're Donald Trump. But generally, generally you hear outreach to the voters who didn't support you from a newly elected candidate, and it's hard to know how much of that actually ends up translating to governing. But I will say from her perspective, she is somebody who understands the political realities of what it takes to affect change in Seattle and this region. And I think also understands that her likelihood of success is greatly increased the more people she has backing her. And so I think that comes from a genuine place, that outreach.
Yeah, and I did want to get into this first battle, I guess you'd call it, for the Wilson administration regarding how police approach drug arrests. So I would love your help in unpacking this web of memos and emails here. So you got new city attorney Erica Evans sent out a memo saying, effective January 1st, police reports of a drug possession or public use case should go through an assistant city prosecutor and a lead liaison team prior to any criminal filing. This is lead law enforcement assisted diversion, tries to put people into treatment for low-level drug offenses, not in jail. Police Chief Sean Barnes then sent out a memo describing this to his officers over this past weekend. And then SPOG President Mike Solon, this is the Seattle Police Officers Guild, the president, Mike Solon, publicly called this out as a naive and ignorant political decision not to arrest offenders for drug use. Media reports ensued. The SPD says it isn't actually changing its policy on drug arrest. The mayor says she isn't changing anything either. She just wants to stand up, lead, and get some results. David, what do you see happening here?
I see Katie Wilson's first political mess.
Yeah.
I think what I see happening here is everyone is a little wrong. And some people are very wrong.
Okay, how do you mean?
At its core, what this memo is saying is basically when somebody is actually arrested and booked, we should check with lead before we move further. That basically we should refer these cases to the kinds of people who can divert low-level drug offenders to some other kind of alternative to police. And that is a number of things. It's not particularly dramatic. I think you can question what exactly it's doing because there's a pretty good chance that if they are being arrested and have been brought into the system, they have already had a conversation or have already had the opportunity to go to lead because most people, when they're arrested for low-level drug offenses, are and should be offered to talk to a lead counselor. And if somebody is arrested, usually that means that they have not wanted that or they've rejected that for whatever reason.
Yes.
So anyway, I would say that the crux of City Attorney Erica Evans' memo is just saying, let's do one more check with lead to see if there's something else we can come up with here. I would say then Sean Barnes' email to his staff kind of blew it up a little bit further than that, making it sound like some kind of advice had and should be given out to police. So I think that was a little bit wrong. The SPOG statement was quite wrong. It was saying that there is a directive to no longer arrest people for drug offenses. That is not the case at all. I mean,
right. And if they're dealing or something like that, absolutely, they get arrested. I mean, Sean Barnes' memo said that too.
Yes. And so that's not right at all. But also Mayor Wilson says there has been no policy change. I would say that's not exactly right either, because it might be true that there has been no policy change change from her or from her office. But the decision to have every case be reviewed by a lead person is a policy change. Whether it's a big one or a small one, you can debate that, but it is a change.
Okay.
So I would say that's not exactly right either. So this whole thing, I think, just is a little messy, and it isn't helped by the fact that Mayor Wilson's cabinet is still probably getting their phones assigned to them.
Right.
They don't have a great kind of communications team set up just yet. Mm-hmm. Erica Evans was answering questions about this as she was being sworn in. And then, Mike Solon of the Police Officers Guild, kind of number one priority is to create as much leverage as he can for future contracts and raises.
Right.
And putting the city into an uncomfortable position, I think he thinks helps him and the guild to do that. So it's a bit of a mess. I think there are legitimate questions about what these kind of reviews with lead will do, kind of the state of low-level drug offense, the misdemeanor. There's plenty of very legitimate questions to be asked about the functionality of Seattle's criminal justice system. But at the end of the day, there is no directive telling anyone to stop making arrests.
Right.
The wrinkle to that is it kind of smacks a little bit of the defund the police conversation. And by that, I mean, it is true that Seattle never voted to defund the police, but by talking as openly as they did about defunding the police, they kind of affected that in a way because officers heard that and started quitting in droves. And so the police shrunk pretty dramatically, but not because there was any specific vote to do so.
Right.
I think there's a possibility of something similar happening here, which it's true that there might not be any actual directive to stop making arrests, but officers have discretion about what they do all the time. It's kind of fundamental to policing.
Right.
And if you have the guild president saying this directive exists, and you have the chief sort of mangling a little bit the message of the new city attorney, you might actually be creating an environment in which officers choose not to make these arrests because they don't think that there's going to be any downstream effect of making that arrest. They think
prosecution.
These aren't going to get prosecuted, so I'm not going to make these arrests. So there is no directive not to make these arrests. Wouldn't entirely surprise me, though, if in 6 months we see a big drop-off in the number of these arrests because the story could end up sort of being a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Another wrinkle with this, we've got Mike Solon, president of the Police Officers Guild. His term ends next month, and I'm wondering, does the drama around this end with him no longer being in that role? It sounds like he won't be running for re-election. Any thoughts on that as we wrap this up?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to remember now because Mike Solon has been the guild president for a while at this point. But his way of doing business is not always how guild presidents do it. And by his way of doing business, I mean he is about as hard-nosed as you can get.
Yep.
He is very vocal criticizing Seattle itself.
Yep.
He's a person who picks fights and does so because he believes it's beneficial to him and his union.
Right.
You can quarrel with that, but it is what it is. The president before him, Kevin Stuckey, I was kind of going down a memory hole here. He was not that at all. He was very conciliatory. He worked very closely within city government. He attended community police commission meetings.
Yes.
He did interviews openly. You could track him down and he would talk. This is a guy who in some ways was the polar opposite of Mike Solon.
And Solon was the vice president and toppled him from that role, which that doesn't happen a lot in SPOG history either. That was interesting.
No, yeah, I mean, and so the guild of, I don't remember what year Solon was elected, but whatever year it was, Kevin Stuckey only got like 20% of the guild's vote.
Right,
He was crushed by Solon. In some ways, it was kind of, we're going to make policing great again in Seattle, and I'm going to restore the respect that you deserve, and that resonated with the police guild. And so Mike Solon is very interesting because he's obviously very controversial. It is indisputable that he has won his members significant raises. Like they have a lot more money because Mike Solon has succeeded at the bargaining table, frankly. Their entry-level cop can make $120,000 now. And so what the guild does and what direction they want to go is, I don't know the answer to that at all, but it could go any number of directions.
Yeah, it's amazing. I just looked up the stat here. He was put into office, became president of SPOG in 2020, which is only 5 years and change ago. But man, it seems like longer than that. He's been a major figure in Seattle politics over the past several years through the pandemic and past it too. All right, we do need to move on here. Coming up, folks, a new year for the Seattle City Council means new roles on committees and other leadership positions too. We'll have some more details coming up on Now Hear This. Well, with some major turnover for the Seattle City Council, it's time to look at who's running what now when it comes to the council committees, which are the groups that help form the legislation that the full council votes on. It's also time to welcome a new city council president on board, which would be District 3 council member Joy Hollingsworth.
We have not always agreed, I know. But that's healthy. It means that we have different perspectives. We always have respected each other. And I'm telling y'all, that's going to be the foundation of our success, is the respect that we have for one another.
David, I know some of these leadership roles can really come across as inside baseball to our listeners, but I think they say something about what the future of the council is going to look like. I just wanted your take on what sort of leadership you're expecting from Council President Hollingsworth and how that might be different for the council that was under Council President Nelson. What do you think?
I think so. I mean, backing up this role, I would say it's sort of historic use was kind of an administrative job in some ways, which I think probably undersells it a little bit because it has real power. But most presidents kind of use this role. They're in charge of staff. They play traffic cop for new legislation. They assign committees. If you want to introduce a bill, it goes to the council president first. They kind of figure out which committee it should go to when it'll be introduced.
Yep.
With that also comes some obvious power because, some committees might be more favorable to a bill than others. And you can maneuver timing and you can play some games with that administrative process. I think what made former Council President Nelson unique was she took that job at a time of a uniform kind of political swing. The council swung so dramatically in one direction that when she took that job, she really saw it as like a mandate to deliver on that message of whatever you want to call it, but more moderate, public safety oriented governing.
Yep.
And so in some ways, she had that job in a much more activist, used that job in a much more activist way in the kind of literal definition of activist, which is she used it to push legislation and usher through legislation that she felt kind of reflected the makeup of this particular council.
Right, because I just jumping in here real quick, yep. I've just noticed in the past, council presidents don't always bring up legislation. Yes. I mean, they've got their hands full doing all the legislative stuff and administrative stuff you were talking about. Keep going. Yeah,
right. I mean, and she had a lot of her own personal bills and really, I think, used that job as a means to advance specific policy, which is not always the case with the presidency. And I would, if I had to guess, I would say Councilmember Hollingsworth brings it back a little bit to the other direction because there is no clear political mandate of this council. It's a much more balanced council. You've got the kind of moderate block and you've got the progressive block and then you've got a few people in between. And so I think the reason Council President Hollingsworth is getting this job is because, as one council person said, she's kind of the only one that everybody likes. So she gets along with everybody. And I think she had in some ways a bit of a tryout with the comprehensive plan process.
There you go.
A really complicated process that required balancing a lot of different priorities and kind of ushering through this policy piece through the whole process. And she did that to the satisfaction or better to most or not, if not all of her colleagues. So they've already seen kind of what kind of ship she runs and what kind of process she can run. Yeah. And I feel like in that process, everyone basically felt like they got a fair shake. As a result, I would expect Council President Hollingsworth to continue with that. I would be surprised if she used it as sort of a activist role. Yeah. And I see her more using it as a way to make the process, whatever process that might be, function as smoothly as possible.
Yep, I could see that too. I did want to talk about some of the committee changes and if there were any notable ones that jumped out to you. It looks like Finance, Councilmember Strauss is still going to run that. We've got the Housing, Arts, and Civil Rights. They always tend to mash these things around from year to year, but it looks like Dion Foster, Councilmember Foster, is going to be the chair of that committee there. Human Services, Labor, and Economic Development, a lot of different stuff getting squashed together there. That's going to be chaired by Councilmember Rink. That's an interesting change there. Land Use and Sustainability, Eddie Lynn, the council member that is coming in here. No surprise there. That's a big part of his background. He's going to be chairing that committee there. Parks and City Light, that's Councilmember Juarez on that. Libraries, that sticks with Rivera. Governance and Utilities, Hollingsworth is going to chair that. And then Public Safety sticks with Kettle. Transportation sticks with Councilmember Saka. I just wanted to run through that so people knew kind of what was going on as it gets presented this week. But anything jump out at you there, David, or did it kind of fall as you thought it would?
No, nothing really jumps out. It's interesting that Saka is still on transportation. I wasn't sure what was going to happen there.
Why do you say that?
I had heard some thought that maybe Foster or something would want transportation, and Councilmember Saka doesn't come from any sort of particular transportation background, and so I didn't have any reporting on this, but I was just wondering if perhaps he would want to work on something else.
Right.
He must be happy there, I suppose.
Yeah.
I always feel a little bad. Poor City Light. It always gets the, and I'm joking, but there is sort of something I think worth talking about with that, which is that the City Light always falls under the purview of kind of the least favored council person, not favored in an opinion way, but it's usually either the rookie or in this case, the interim council person who's going to leave in 10 months in Deborah Juarez. And, Councilmember Sawant had it for years, mostly because no one got along with her. So they always just gave her City Light.
Poor
and
old City Light.
It's kind of clockwork that either the rookie or the disfavored or the outgoing council person gets to oversee City Light. I don't really know why that is, because City Light has some enormous questions.
It's a massive, and when you talk about it being sustainable, you've reported on that too, for sure.
Yeah, like major questions. They have billions of dollars in infrastructure upgrades they have to do. Frankly, we don't know how we're going to energize our grid in like 20 years, so maybe we should figure that out.
Good idea.
If I had a bully pulpit, it would be that the city council should take City Light more seriously than it does, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, well, we'll see how this all shakes out with the council committees there. I did want to touch on a larger regional story that your colleague Taylor Blatchford wrote about in the Times, the future of our crisis care center system. These centers, we've reported on these before, offer help to people with pressing mental health problems. They can walk in or get a drop-off from a first responder. The idea is to relieve pressure on hospitals and jails, and the state has put millions of dollars towards this concept to get this going. But keeping these things running is not looking great. The one facility that opened in Kirkland recently has so many people coming in who don't have Medicare, who are not insured. King County is helping fill in some of the gaps with a levy that voters passed in 2023. But this looming challenge is the new budget proposed by the governor does not increase funding for those who are uninsured. David, I know you got a lot of providers saying this project is not going to be sustainable, especially when more people get kicked off Medicaid in the coming year under the new federal administration here. How do you look at what's happening with these crisis care centers?
Yeah, their success is pretty important. and I say that because there is a sense that our local governments are not doing enough to tackle acute mental health crises. And these crisis care center initiatives are meant to tackle that.
Yeah.
If they fall into the trap of not doing as much as they thought they would do for more money, that I don't think is going to do great things for people's trust in local government's ability to address these acute issues.
Right.
Also, a lot of this, it's probably going to get worse as some of these new Medicaid requirements kick in from the federal government that are likely to mean a lot fewer people go through all the steps they need to go through and remain on Medicaid. When you talk about the downstream effects of something like that, this is it. I mean, it is about, of course, what it means for the people who no longer are on Medicaid. It is also about the systems that are built around people being on Medicaid, so hospitals and crisis care centers like this. And when there are people who are not on Medicaid, it just becomes more expensive and less financially viable for all of these systems. Yeah. And then that affects those of us who are not on Medicaid in real ways. When you're talking about hospitals, it means hospitals don't have as much funding. But when you're talking about care centers, we want these to succeed because for a lot of reasons, because we care about the people that we see going through mental health crises on the street. Yeah. Also, it can lead to some unfortunate outcomes when there is untreated mental health crisis or drug addiction crisis, and we want those things to be addressed. And so when the financial viability of these centers that voters have endorsed is in question, it just is a really bad ripple effects.
Oh, for sure, because I know in the city of Seattle, King County has said, all right, we're putting in one of these crisis care centers at that old polyclinic site up in First Hill, Capitol Hill area there. And I just wonder, what happens to first responders, let's say, in these cases, if they get caught in a situation, well, we're supposed to drop off these people at this crisis center, but maybe the center doesn't have the resources to help. I mean, there's some serious questions there, it seems like.
Yeah, and those aren't the sort of questions you want people to be asking themselves in those
especially
situations.
When you're establishing something new, Yeah,
exactly. So I think it's part of a broader frustration that progressives in some ways, like Katie Wilson and Zohran Mamdani, have promised to address, which is progressive goals not delivering in the way that they have been promised. We talk about affordable housing, we talk about crisis care centers like this. It's just that the cost and effectiveness and their ability to do as much as people thought they did from the start, it is not quite as extensive as was promised originally. So again, we can talk about whose fault that is, but everybody here has a vested interest in seeing these things succeed. Oftentimes the answer is usually just they need more money. Yeah.
So more down this path here. I want to keep going here as we head into 2026. What is really changing? What is going to stay the same in Seattle as new leadership establishes itself? Some thoughts ahead on what's next. David, we touched on this idea in our end of the year show last year, but I wanted to take a slightly different twist as we start the year 2026. Your colleague Danny Westneat brought this up. Yes, we're in a big year of change when it comes to new local leaders, but maybe some trends like reducing crime over the past 3 years. That was cool. Maybe we keep that. Maybe cleaning up more homeless encampments. Maybe that should stay the same. Those are his opinions, plenty of others out there. But it really came down to this for me. What sort of battles is Mayor Wilson going to stick her neck out on? Does she need to make major changes on public safety? I don't know if this most recent fire with Spog is anything here, but in terms of where she needs to stick out her neck, what needs to change? What is going to stay the same? What do you see going forward?
Well, we already know that she's staying the same to a certain extent with policing. She didn't fire Chief Sean Barnes. Mm-hmm. So there's that. If she really, truly felt like a change was necessary, she would have made it, even if it would have been complicated. I think she, throughout the campaign, and I think since being elected, has reiterated that despite what some people have said, she is not fully and fundamentally against clearing out homeless encampments.
She's pragmatic about it, yeah.
How that looks, we won't know until probably another few weeks or months.
Yeah. And the World Cup too. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, and the World Cup, she's so far, we haven't heard a lot about department churn. She put in a new SDOT director, and I think that's the only new department head she has announced so far. She's announced a few others that she's keeping. And so to the question of what will change, what won't change, so far there's a few things that already are not going to change. I guess my thought is probably her thinking is there are a few specific things she is going to want to do, and will try to avoid overturning the apple cart on some of the other issues that maybe she was not specifically elected to tackle. That can be tricky, as we are seeing with the last day of the news cycle, which is sometimes it's not up to her what issues she has to spend time on.
Well, is there like an achievable goal that you could think of, like a political win she could knock out in her first 100 days? I'm asking you to be a political consultant here, but do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually interesting. We were talking about that. She hasn't done, Zoran Mondani, when he was sworn in, like immediately had a bunch of executive orders he signed. And you usually see that, particularly with presidency, but also with mayors and stuff. They come in and they have all these executive orders that they sign, and some of them are meaningful, a lot of them are not. She hasn't done that, which is kind of interesting. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we haven't seen some big flurry of activity of things being repealed or whatever it might be. And so I guess the answer to that is I don't know. I mean, she has this goal of 4,000 shelters over her first units over her first term. Yeah. She told me a month or so ago that, by March, she wants to have some of those established already. Yeah. If she could get 100 new temporary shelter units in her first 100 days, I think that would probably go a long way for her, and giving some assurance that she's actually working toward this promise. I think she's going to have some big questions to answer about where money is coming from, where money's going. Yep. I always think of the Mike Tyson phrase about everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And that tends to define new mayors, particularly ones who have not held elected office before. And so I think probably a lot of 100 days is going to be stuff like what we saw yesterday, which is, inordinate amounts of time spent on something that she probably did not want to be spending a lot of time on. Yeah. But that is the job.
Yeah, putting out some fires. Well, we do need to wrap up, and I wanted to recognize everyone a special holiday that some of us may have overlooked in the past few weeks. December 27th, 2025, marked the baseball solstice. This is the halfway point between the last pitch of the World Series and the first pitch of spring training games in February. David, I just wanted to ask, how did you celebrate this important holiday?
Oh, man, I celebrated by looking for and not finding Mariners roster moves. They still They still haven't done anything.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that you didn't sacrifice your children or anything.
No, nothing like that.
It's a little crazy. All right. Well, we'll see where it goes. David, thank you, as always, for joining me. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. If you like what you're hearing, thanks a lot. Become a patron, why don't you? Support the show. Head to Patreon online, find Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Pledge $5 a month or more, and thank you for your support. You can hear this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen, we're there. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. See you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2026.